rather than ban something outright, local governments should really think carefully about how drone technology might serve them, how it might work best in their communities. And there's always kind of that balancing act that local policymakers have to strike in terms of embracing innovation while keeping their cities safe and efficient.
You're listening to the Drone Radio Show podcast, the show about drones and the people who use them for business, fun, and research. Hosted by Randy Goers.
Hello, everyone. This is Randy Goers, and welcome to the Drone Radio Show podcast, episode 69. Have you ever wondered what role cities have in advancing the drone industry? If you ask that question of today's guest, she would say they play a critical role in promoting innovation and public safety. Nicole DuPuis is a senior associate at the National League of Cities, a Washington, D.C. based organization dedicated to helping city leaders build better communities. Working in partnership with the 49 state municipal leagues, NLC serves as a resource to and an advocate for the more than 19,000 cities, villages, and towns it represents. At the NLC, Nicole manages the league's best practice research work on transportation, public works, and telecommunications, and helps local leaders communicate the impact of infrastructure projects in their communities. Nicole's areas of expertise include transportation planning and governance, broadband access and adoption, and public utility regulation. Recently, the NLC published a report for its members on drones, aptly titled Cities and Drones: What Cities Need to Know About Unmanned Aerial Vehicles. With Part 107 now in effect and the drone industry poised to expand, communities are sure to see a rise in drone use and potentially new concerns over safety and privacy. Cities and Drones is a primer on drones for local officials, providing insight into Part 107, as well as offering suggestions for how local governments can craft drone ordinances to encourage innovation while also protecting their cities. Nicole is the principal author of the report, and she is here to talk about its findings and recommendations, and how cities and members of the drone industry can work together to craft sensible solutions that provide benefit to all. Let's pick up the interview where I asked Nicole to introduce herself.
My name is Nicole DuPuis, and I am the Principal Associate for Urban Innovation at the National League of Cities. And in that role, I oversee two portfolios. One is our infrastructure portfolio, and the other is our urban innovation portfolio, which focuses on new technologies, new innovations, how cities are kind of grappling with them, and what they can do to kind of integrate them into their daily operations.
For those that might be listening that haven't heard of the National League of Cities, can you talk about what the organization is, what its mission is, and what it does?
Sure. So the National League of Cities is the nation's leading advocacy organization devoted to strengthening and promoting cities as centers of opportunity, leadership, and governance. We have memberships and partnerships with state municipal leagues, and we serve as a resource and advocate for more than 19,000 cities and towns, and more than 218 million Americans. And I work specifically in NLC's Center for City Solutions and Applied Research, which provides research and analysis on key topics and trends important to cities, creative solutions to improve the quality of life in communities, inspiration and ideas for local officials to use in tackling tough issues, and opportunities for cities and city leaders to connect with their peers, share their experiences, and kind of learn about innovative approaches in managing cities.
Do you have any examples of how the league has acted as an advocate on behalf of cities in the past?
I mentioned we have a Center for City Solutions and Applied Research. We kind of are the research wing of NLC, and we primarily develop resources for our city leader members. We also have a federal advocacy department that focuses mostly on lobbying for the interests of cities. And then we have an Institute for Youth Education and Families, and they focus on kind of technical assistance, outreach, and grant-funded projects, helping cities, usually in cohorts, to run different programs or work on different issues.
Now, the league recently produced a report called Cities and Drones to provide some background to local governments on the issue of drones. Why did the League do it, and what was the purpose of the report?
Well, NLC recognized that drones are becoming more mainstream as a technology and more relevant to cities, both in terms of the possibilities looming for them and their use, as well as the challenges inherent for cities when they need to legislate on drone operation, whether that operation be commercial, personal, or public. So we recognize the need amongst our city members for guidance on this issue, especially as it related to the new FAA rule on drone usage. And this is sort of the Wild West for cities in that it's also new. We don't know what it's going to look like. So our job is to help local governments and policymakers address some of these new technological innovations and challenges and opportunities. And we saw this need as in terms of the new challenges and opportunities posed by drones. So we recognized that when the FAA released their final rule, we needed to kind of weigh in on that discussion and make sure that cities kind of A, had a voice, and B, had guidance in terms of how to move forward.
Were you getting any feedback from cities before you undertook the study?
Yeah, I mean, we'd heard a little bit about the issue from some of our city members. We have 2 big meetings a year, and at those meetings, one is held in Washington, D.C., and the other is held at a different city around the country, somewhere around the country. This year, it'll be in Pittsburgh. And we heard from cities that this was an issue that they were grappling with, and that they were, in a lot of cases, waiting on that FAA rule. So we knew kind of after hearing that we needed to provide some sort of guidance and help to unpack that rulemaking.
You know, a question that comes up is, why should cities be concerned about what's going on with drones? Because isn't the FAA supposed to be regulating drones and taking care of all of those requirements?
Well, certainly it's good that the FAA used its rulemaking power to clarify some things, but there was also a great deal of gray area left after the final rule was released. You know, drones have the potential to revolutionize the operations of cities as well as many industries as their technology advances. Any commercial arena that involves outdoor photography or visual inspection will likely be experimenting with drones in the near future. We're seeing retailers who want to use drones for package delivery. But, you know, with all of those kind of opportunities, there are challenges as well. So, you know, there are safety issues, privacy issues, environmental concerns. And even though airspace is regulated by the FAA, and it kind of feels like something we've never really done before, drones will be taking off and landing in cities, which makes this sort of a land use issue all of a sudden. And ultimately, the FAA's final rule on drones, like I said, did leave some opportunity for city governments to legislate on the issue.
As far as land use goes, that's a power that's vested solely with local government.
That's right. It's hyper local. It's different everywhere. And really, you're right. Local governments are the only ones who can kind of maximize and use that power.
In your study, did it talk about the types of things that local governments can do in the regulatory end of it? What ranges do they have at their disposal in terms of regulations?
First and foremost, we always encourage, you know, cities as they think about how to craft an ordinance or how to legislate on an issue, we always encourage them to promote accountability while kind of embracing innovation. So we're never going to say, go ahead and just outright ban a new technology, because that's not necessarily good for anybody. But cities can focus on 2 issues when they're thinking about developing drone-related ordinances. We discussed land use and zoning powers. They can use those to designate when and where drones can take off and land and operate, as well as any operational limitations or criteria. And they can also create ordinances that punish operators for operating in a way that's reckless or endangers humans or property, while also considering the appropriate enforcement infrastructure. So those are 2 things that the FAA can't really do, isn't really in the position to do, that cities are. So focusing on those kind of 2 mechanisms enables communities to protect themselves while also promoting innovation and also avoiding preemption from other governing bodies like states.
To be clear, the League doesn't advocate a certain position on regulations.
That's right. We really leave it to our city members. We advocate first and foremost for local control. So in advocating for local control, we recognize that all cities are different, all communities have different needs, And it really is, there's no boilerplate solution that we can offer. It really is up to local policymakers to assess their community and determine how this is going to work out best.
In completing the study, were there any things that you found that were unexpected?
Well, like I mentioned, we were surprised, I guess, by the number of cities who were really waiting to act until the FAA came out with their rule. While I guess that is not super surprising, I think that going along, the FAA always kind of expressed that state and local governments would have a pretty significant role in all of this. And so a lot of our members really were just kind of waiting to see kind of how the FAA came down on this. And, I think that when the rule was released, what we saw is that there was a lot of space for local governments to legislate.
Have you seen an uptick in any interest on local governments now the rule has passed?
Yeah, we've heard from some of our members, and certainly they've called to kind of get some additional guidance, especially if these ordinances are something that their councils are considering.
And going back to the report, what were some of the key issues that you think local governments and commercial operators and recreation operators are going to have to deal with on the local level?
Like so many technological innovations, the drone industry has evolved super rapidly. And it feels like it almost changed overnight, and the ways in which people even think about drones changed rapidly as well. So 2 years ago, mention of the word drone might incite discussions about, warfare, human rights, national defense strategy. But today we're talking about regulatory compliance and safety and business and commerce and all of these new kind of things. So that discussion has definitely changed. As for the FAA's position on this, the rule kind of left large swaths of regulatory territory up to state and local authorities. So that does leave cities with kind of the responsibility of now addressing some of the challenges with drones. And we don't necessarily see that as a bad thing, but it gives local governments the opportunity to determine, like I said, what's best for their community, how drones might best benefit or operate in the specific context of their community. So we have challenges, mostly what we've heard from our members: safety, privacy, nuisance, and trespassing concerns, all of which are kind of compounded by the lack of accountability associated with drone operations. You can't necessarily always see who's operating a drone. So, there are safety issues when operators fly drones over people or near planes. Privacy concerns often arise anytime there's a small device hovering nearby that could be taking video or photos. And frankly, cities need to address any circumstance in which municipally owned drone might be collecting information about citizens. And then finally, drones, like I said, because they can be operated remotely, it makes it difficult to identify operators who are flying recklessly or harassing individuals or causing injury to persons or property. So, these are the most commonly cited challenges, and cities will need to think about how to address them in the best way. That being said, we encourage our members to always be thoughtful in how they act toward new technological innovations, and rather than ban something outright, local governments should really think carefully about how drone technology might serve them, how it might work best in their communities. And there's always kind of that balancing act that local policymakers have to strike in terms of embracing innovation while keeping their cities safe and efficient.
Yeah, exactly. Because there's a couple of instances I think that local governments need to be aware of before they act too quickly. The first one being that they themselves could be a big user of drones. And so,
absolutely.
And I think your report touched upon the opportunities that a local government could have in adopting drone technology for their own uses. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there are a number of ways that cities could use drones to their advantage to make their city operations and services more efficient. They can be used for law enforcement, firefighting, used as rural ambulances. We're seeing a lot of interest from cities in using them for inspection of infrastructure, environmental monitoring, and disaster management. And of course, we've heard all of the excitement and hype about the commercial drone industry using drones to deliver packages Amazon is a big player in that, and as well as Walmart and Google. So we'll see kind of, I think, a transformation in the way that we get our packages from those organizations, those companies in the next couple of years. But also some of the things that I think people don't think about often are farming, using drones to spray and treat crops. Aerial photography is becoming more and more popular. In fact, more than half of the first 1,000 commercial exemptions granted by the FAA were for aerial photography. So this sort of aerial imaging is becoming a really common and popular tool for industries like real estate.
In the other area where I think there's a big opportunity where cities have to be really mindful about the direction they take is that there's an economic development result from the drone industry. Some communities have really gone forward very hard in the whole technology of drones and have built a strong ecosystem around the technology. So cities can look at the whole drone industry as an opportunity to create new jobs, STEM education, all those kind of things as part of their community.
Oh, absolutely. Anytime there's a new technological innovation, we have to think about what that means for the economy and who's going to be producing all of these drones that are in pretty high demand. It's got to be somewhere. So certainly I could imagine cities fighting for the chance to get the drone industry in their community, in their economy. And
it kind of highlights something you said earlier about the need for local governments to balance what their regulatory posture is going to be against what the impacts of that regulation might be.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Since reports come out, have you heard anything from any communities or anybody because the report's only about, a couple of months old?
Yeah, exactly. We released it, I want to say, in July. That sounds right. We have been hearing from a lot of communities in California are in the process of considering or deliberating over drone legislation. And in fact, we have some cases in the report, but since the cities that are highlighted in the report have passed ordinances, so many other cities have passed regulations or are currently deliberating on the passage of ordinances. Lincoln, Nebraska passed an ordinance earlier this year. East Lansing, Michigan just joined the long list of college towns that have passed ordinances. They passed theirs in February. And then Cleveland City Council, they passed legislation to regulate aerial drones, which permits authorities to assist the Federal Aviation Administration in regulating aerial drones. Before they passed it, the police didn't have any authority to respond to illegal drone operation within the city. So their legislation also requires that, per the FAA rule, drone operators register their devices or they'll face an additional misdemeanor charge. So I thought that was kind of an interesting way of going about it. It's a little different than just passing a piece of legislation, really kind of working in step with the federal government.
I haven't seen a whole lot of ordinances, but the ones I have seen seem to be falling in the line of where the local government has set out places where drone flight is not allowed. It's usually places of critical infrastructure like stadiums or high volume places, special events.
Yep.
The ordinances that have come out don't seem to be too restrictive, but they've identified areas where a drone can operate and where they can't operate and so forth. Is that what you've been sort of seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that the number one concern for cities as they think about this issue is safety. So to your point, what they're doing is they're not necessarily saying you can't operate your drone, but they're saying you can't operate your drone when we're having a mega event, or you can't operate your drone over the city's stadium, or you can't operate your drone over this densely populated or packed area during a certain time. So certainly, I think you're spot on. Cities are trying to control drone operations purely in the name of safety. Nobody wants a mega event to be vulnerable to reckless drone activity. So, and there are a lot of, I think, insurance and kind of liability implications there too. But yeah, mostly in the name of safety.
One of the things I got thinking about, because I am a city planner and I develop policies that end up turning into ordinances, there's always the enforcement aspect.
Right.
We can always write an ordinance to do whatever we want, but then the question is, well, how do you enforce it? Local governments need to be mindful of what enforcement impacts it's going to have if they write an overly aggressive ordinance, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, that was one of the major criticisms before the FAA released their rule. Everybody said, well, that's absolutely absurd. How are they ever going to enforce anything like that? And the reality is that the FAA itself can't, and they've kind of passed the buck down to local governments. So in that same vein, local governments need to be very much aware as they craft their own ordinances of what the implications are going to be for enforcement, kind of what kind of weight that's going to put on public safety officers, who's going to do the enforcing, who's going to do the fining, who's going to be keeping track of all of this. Those are very real implications that I think frankly, we're just going to have to see how it plays out. If the projections for the high number of drones and drone sales and drone activity are accurate, that might call for cities to really kind of rethink how they enforce these types of things.
Yeah, and the long-term goal, I mean, really, we're all part of individual communities, and we're all trying to figure out what is the best way for it to grow.
Right.
It requires that all of us work together instead of working against each other. Did you research or did the league get into how that cooperation should be, or maybe what expectation is there of commercial and recreation pilots?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the next step for most cities, if they haven't already, I predict will be crafting local ordinances on this issue. Recreational and commercial operators would definitely be, I think, best served in embracing kind of open and fair discussions about these issues, meeting city policymakers at the table to flesh some of these things out. The worst outcome, I think, would be a showdown or a grudge of some sort between industry and commercial operators and local governments. That never works out well for anybody. And city officials, frankly, don't take too kindly to being disregarded or talked over or having their authority preempted in any way. So that's the sort of deliberation that results in, these kind of unfortunate all-out bans on new technology. And so the willingness, I think, of the drone industry to have open discussions with cities will be really, really crucial over these next few months. And I think will make a significant impact on the way some of these ordinances come together.
In my experience has always been the communities that are able to come together in a cooperative posture are the ones that reach usually a solution that works for most people and then also creates opportunities in the long run.
Absolutely. Economic opportunities like you mentioned previously. If a city is known to be pro-innovation or open to innovation, good things tend to follow.
Who would be interested in reading the report? And the report's called Cities and Drones. Who would be interested in reading that report?
Yeah, so we always kind of think about when we're writing these resources, we're always thinking about our members. So our members are primarily city council members, but our member actually is the city itself. So really anybody who kind of has a stake in this conversation, maybe it's somebody who's working in the planning office or the city department of transportation, or of course local electeds and policymakers, but that's who we kind of targeted with this report.
I thought it was a comprehensive and a well-written report, especially for policymakers or people that are trying to figure out what the implications of the technology and the industry would be on their community. So I think it was a really good start to get the discussion moving at the local level.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's a new policy frontier. So, there's this kind of ever-growing group of folks, at least in Washington, D.C., who are kind of known as drone lobbyists now. And so, when something like that happens, and it happens so quickly, and I don't know if it was unexpected, but when it happens quickly like that, there has to be kind of an effort, at least on our part, to make sure, cities have a stake in that conversation and open up both lines of communication so that, like you said, cities can kind of communicate with the drone industry and vice versa, and everybody can make sure that their concerns and thoughts are on the table.
So did you pick up an interest in drones yourself after doing the report?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Just talking to all of our city members and all of the representatives from cities that we kind of featured in the report about the interesting things that they're doing with drones was fascinating. Because if you're not kind of in the space, you might not realize just how vast the potential is for cities in using drones. So that was a really interesting part of this process for me, and kind of learning more about not just drones, which I definitely learned a ton more about drones, but cities, how cities can use drones.
And what's the next steps for the league in this area of drones?
Well, definitely we're hearing a lot from our city members and doing our best to kind of guide them in terms of, kind of in a more technical assistance way as they bring their ordinances up for deliberation. Our upcoming meeting in Pittsburgh in November will be hosting a workshop on this very issue. So we hope that this, at the very least, brings about some interesting discussion, and we can educate more of our members on this issue.
And that's the first time that this topic's made it to the agenda of one of your national meetings.
That's right. Absolutely. We attempted to set up a drone demonstration, but we got shut down by the convention center. So that didn't work out. But yes, we're definitely, this is the first year we've kind of discussed this issue among our membership.
Did we miss anything? Is there anything that we should be talking about that we didn't?
Well, I'll just conclude by saying, as with all issues, we advocate for local authority. I mentioned earlier, we don't necessarily advocate for a specific position, but more so local authority on issues like this. So as we kind of see our city airspace become more crowded and more automated, I think that there really is a role for cities to play in legislating this issue. And while the FAA, set national standards, local governments will likely still be responsible for the bulk of enforcement. So cities have a very significant role to play in developing their own regulations regarding drone usage.
That's it for episode 69 of the Drone Radio Show. I hope you enjoyed hearing from Nicole DuPuis of the National League of Cities and learning about some of the issues and opportunities related to UAVs for local governments. I want to thank Nicole and the NLC for taking the time to speak with me. If you want more information on the Cities and Drones report, the National League of Cities, or just want to connect with Nicole, check out their webpage at nlc.org. A link to the report is also provided on the Drone Radio Show webpage. As a city planner, I encourage you to read the report and engage your local officials to ensure those sensible, broad-based solutions can be developed. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a positive review on iTunes. It really does help. And as always, I hope you'll listen to more episodes of the Drone Radio Show podcast to hear how others are using drones for business, fun, and research. For the Drone Radio Show, I'm Randy Goers.
This has been the Drone Radio Show podcast. More information on today's show can be found on our website at www.droneradioshow.com. If you're using drone technology for business, fun, or research and would like to share your experience on the show, please visit our website and fill out a guest appearance application. And don't forget to follow us on your favorite social media channels.